All right, welcome to our last Liberty Salon of our opening weekend for the book Freak Power. We've got some amazing people in the house, people that were there when the 1970 campaign happened. Not only were they there, they helped make it happen, or inspired to make it happen. We've got Joe Edwards here, 1969 mayoral candidate, David Heiser, photographer, Bob Krieger, photographer. And I'm going to talk just briefly a little bit about my interaction with these fine gentlemen and sort of their role in all this. Joe met Hunter late one night when Hunter called them on the telephone, and they wanted to meet to talk about local politics. And there was a movie playing at the Wheeler Opera House, The Battle of Algiers. And Hunter asked Joe to meet him. And I'm just going to read a quick little quote about that little interaction. At the time, it seemed necessary to come up with a candidate whose strange tastes and paralegal behavior were absolutely beyond question. A man whose candidacy would torture the outer limits of political gall, whose name would strike fear and shock into the heart of every burgher, and whose massive unsuitability for the job would cause even most political drug child in the town's most degenerate commune to shout, "Yes, I must vote for that man." Joe Edwards didn't quite fit that bill. He was a bit too straight for the acid people and a little too strange for the liberals, but he was the only candidate even marginally acceptable on both ends of our untried coalition spectrum. And 24 hours after our first jangled phone talk about running for mayor, he said, "Fuck it, why not?" The next day was Sunday, and the Battle of Algiers was playing at the Wheeler Opera House. We agreed to meet afterwards on the street, but the hookup was difficult because I didn't know what he looked like. So we ended up milling around for a while, casting sidelong glances at each other, and I remember thinking, Jesus, could that be him over there? That scurvy-looking geek with the shifty eyes? Shit, he'll never win anything. But the thing is Joe almost did win in 1969. He lost by 7 votes, and his run for mayor inspired Hunter to run for sheriff. I think Hunter said, "Hey Joe, if you win the mayoral race, I'll run for sheriff. We'll take over the government." And Joe's race, unfortunately, they only sent out the mail-in ballots days before the election, and to places like Nepal, Guatemala, places where the votes definitely weren't getting back in time. And whether that was by design or not, that cost him the election. There's some interesting photos of Joe in this article which chronicled his campaign. And some of the great photos were taken by David and Bob. And they had the pleasure of following Hunter around during the campaign and capturing amazing shots. And I'm going to just show 2 quick photos that are in the exhibit. One is this one of Sheriff Whitmire and his posse. And Bob Krieger, over the years, has photographed the sheriff's department over the succeeding decades. And one of the next photos is of Dick Keenest and his band of, they called them Dick Dove and his Deputies of Love. So this was the climate at the time, and the hippies were being persecuted. And Joe, the reason why Hunter and Joe hooked up was because Joe defended the hippies and brought a class action lawsuit against the city, which is recounted in the book, and some of these articles over here. But that was really the birth of Freak Power. So I'm going to sort of hand it off to him, let him say a few words, and then we're going to go down the line. They've all got interesting things to say, so we're just going to keep it lively. And here's Joe.
Well, one of the questions that people ask me from time to time is, what was it like to be around Hunter? And for those of you who know him, he spoke extemporaneously, just like he wrote. It was like kind of crazy. At first, you wonder, is this guy really serious? And then you kind of get into it. And he would inspire you to sort of act like a teenager again. We would do things that I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to relax enough to do the things that you would do around him. But he was a very unique individual, extremely intelligent, and always pushing the envelope, partially to see what the reaction of others is going to be, and partially for his own entertainment. But you know, that little description in the Rolling Stone article was accurate. I'd never met him. He called me at like 3 or 4 in the morning. I didn't know who called us at that time of night, and started telling me I needed to run for mayor. And I'd never spoken to him and didn't know who he was. And you know, he said, well, meet me at this movie. The Battle of Algiers is about it's a kind of a docudrama about torture by the French forces trying to prevent Algeria from getting its independence. And we were dealing with some pretty heavy-handed policing at that time. The undersheriff ultimately was removed from office forcibly by the district judge because he was abusing prisoners, kicking and spitting on them when they were handcuffed, etc. So we were dealing with that, but that description was very accurate. When we got out of the movie, there was a crowd of people, and I'm looking around, I wonder which one of these people is Hunter. And he was doing the same. So as the crowd thinned, we were circling each other, and I walked up and said, are you Hunter? And we went from there over to the Jerome and Beers and met with who was it? Yeah, Solheim and Jim Salter. And the three of them ultimately brought me to the fuck why not statement. So it was a wild and crazy time, and a lot of confrontation and a lot of fun at the same time. And I have little vignettes of memory, like one night we were in Dwight Shellman's office, and we were planning something to do with the campaign for his run for sheriff, and it's like 9 o'clock at night. They locked the Wheeler Opera House door at 7, and we heard this clatter and clanking, and Hunter comes up the fire escape, which used to be on the west side, and opens Dwight's window and climbs in with a 6-pack and a gallon of wild turkey in his shorts and his LL Bean jacket. So it was a little weird and a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it, and you know, we'll be glad to cover some other incidents as we go on.
And I'm going to do a little, that was wonderful, thank you, Joe. And I'm going to introduce David Heiser, because I want to give a little background on David. He's a world-famous National Geographic photographer, and his work has been published all over the world. And when I was doing this project, I did it in Lamu Island in Kenya. I wrote the book. And I didn't have a lot of material, and I didn't have a lot of photos. I'd been working with Bob, who has a lot of amazing photos here. But one of the really special events in putting together the book was when I came back, I thought, oh man, I think the book's done. You know, this was last June. You know, I'm almost there. And I got in touch with David, and he was just the most gracious, generous guy. And he said, you know, when I photographed, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but he said, when I photographed Hunter, it was some of my best work, and let's get together. And when we met, he pulled out this little box of contact sheets, and it was the most amazing photographs. And they just captured, you know, a photograph, you know, is 1,000 words. These were photographs that were so powerful and moving. And then he said, you know, let's work together. And that, scanning those slides and going through that process was a real pleasure for me, and I think it really made the book that it is, along with Bob's photos. And so I just wanted to interject that and mention David before he starts talking. Thank you.
Well, thanks, DJ. I was friends with Hunter, and we'd done at least one magazine article together, an assignment. But I wasn't really close with him because we had completely different lifestyles. I'm kind of an early to bed, early to rise sort of guy, and Hunter is exactly the opposite. So, you know, we never really got together very much. But when he was into the campaign, he had to keep kind of normal hours because he had to interact with other people. So that made it easy. So every morning, about 8 o'clock or so, I drive out to Owl Farm and photograph them out there. And a number of the pictures show him in the kitchen, often with his wife Sandy, looking at yesterday's newspapers to see what was going on as far as the media goes. And then I just followed him into town, sometimes with armed escorts, because there was a lot of paranoia at the time about perhaps violence would occur. And then it was pretty much the rest of the day in the Hotel Jerome in the upper suite upstairs, which was the campaign headquarters. And it just all unfolded. So it was a beautiful sort of compact story, and it was as a photojournalist project, it was fairly easy to do. Now the pictures have been used quite a bit, but often just a small subset of them. Some of the ones like maybe Hunter with the picture of J. Edgar Hoover behind him. That's been used a lot. And some of the ones where he's on the phone and looking fairly stern about the whole thing. And some of them have been used in films as well. But this is the first time that I've been able to really use the whole shoot, so to speak. And that's why I've really appreciated working with DJ, because I ended up having about 30 pictures in the book, which really sort of told my side of the story. So it's really, to me, has been the most pleasurable use of the pictures, except for one other example. A man in LA wrote to me to ask permission if he could have one of the pictures, a portrait of Hunter, tattooed on his torso. And I gave permission, and I got back from him an iPhone picture of Hunter's head all the way. So it's walking around out there in LA somewhere.
Thank you. And I'm going to interject a little bit and talk a little bit about Bob Krieger. And unfortunately, his credit line wasn't in the talk. We have the pleasure of having him sit in here as well, because he took a lot of these amazing photos too. And the first one I showed you about the sheriffs with the guns, and then later around the corner there's another shot of the sheriffs, and they're all unarmed and not in uniform, and they look like peace officers. And we're currently in the process of organizing another photo shoot with the Sheriff's Department today. And Bob's going to take the shot because over the years he's cataloged the transformation of the Sheriff's Department. He's also done a lot of other amazing work cataloging bluegrass music. He helped, he's been in Aspen since, what, 65? Yeah. And he put an amazing book together about truckers and the trucker lifestyle, which I think was in 1970 as well. And he was there, and one of the funny things about doing this research was, I see these photos, and then it's a shot that David would shoot, and there's Krieger in the corner shooting the other way. And then and then I look at Krieger's shot, and there's David like standing over everybody, like this, catching it. So, they were both there and getting different shots of the same thing, but together their photos really made the book the visual treatise that it is. So I just wanted to introduce him, and he's going to tell a story now.
Okay, as DJ said, I moved out here in 1965. I dropped out of graduate school. I was going to be a juvenile parole officer, and I decided that wasn't my calling. And so I came out here, and I was a folk musician. I played at a place called the Abbey, which no longer exists. It's down in the basement. And after a couple of years, I got tired of that as well, and found another new way to starve to death, which is being a photographer. But I had a radio show on KSNO on Saturday mornings of folk music, which was the only radio station in town. And one morning, the radio show was from 9 to 10, I think, in the morning, Saturday morning. But one morning, Hunter calls up and requests a song by the a bluegrass band, Greenbrier Boys. And so it was obviously somebody that knew something about the music, and we got to know each other later. But a few years later, or about a year or so later, I was building these dark rooms for a photography school that was run by David's ex-wife in the basement of the Jerome. And the first set of dark rooms were under where the bar is, and it was a dirt floor with duck boards, and we built that one. And then the next year they put the Rocking Horse in, which is a disco that's under the bar that nobody knows exists anymore. But we had to build another set of dark rooms in what had originally been the coal bin and then a dry cleaning plant in the back corner of the Jerome. So here's this photography school in the basement, and Hunter's campaign headquarters are in Parlor B, which is on the second floor, and we'd all kind of meet in the bar in the middle. So most of those crowd pictures you see during the election are all the center of the eye photography students up in the, was it Parlor B or where the big?
Yeah.
But the BBC sent over a film crew, and they were making a documentary, which I guess, because I gave a copy of it to the Historical Society, so they've got a copy of it. So that's essentially where the crowd all came from.
One other thing about Bob that's really amazing is he keeps everything. He's got these slides and these bins, right? And it's like, you know, they're all organized. There's all these meticulous numbers. And one of the cool things is he kept a lot of the stuff from the campaign, too. So when I was writing the book, we would go and we'd meet, and he'd go, oh, you know what? He just moved. And so he was going through all these old boxes. He goes,
well,
you know,
I moved a year ago last week. I'm still unpacking.
And as he
I
was,
moved to Carbondale.
And as he was unpacking, he'd say, you know, I found this newsletter thing. It's like page 2 of this, you know, some newsletter. You want to see it? And it was like something I'd been looking for like 3 years. And he just pulls it out of these files. And it was really unbelievable that his archival skills preserved a lot of this. And so when I was doing the book, he was a really valuable resource for finding the original stuff, because it was so hard to find it. I mean, Bob just moved to Carbondale. A lot of the people that were involved moved to Carbondale a long time ago. Houses were torn down, things were lost, things were uprooted, and a lot of the material came from, you know, barns, basements, attics around town, old dumpsters in front of Victorians that had been torn down or, you know, lifted up in a new basement. So I'm going to open it up if anybody has any questions.
Let me finish with
the
the first sheriff's picture.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, the first sheriff's picture, I was doing an article for a now defunct magazine called Aspen Illustrated News. Unfortunately, Gaylord, who was the editor, is too ill to be here, but he was one whale of an editor, and he did a lot of editing for Hunter as well. But essentially, it was an article trying to make the Pitkin County Courthouse look like old Victorian tintypes. And I just asked the sheriff's department, I said, have you got some old shotguns or something like that you could? And they went around and grabbed all these sawed-off shotguns and rifles and so on. And so the rest of it is their doing, not mine. They portrayed themselves in the way that they wanted to. And the other one with Joe, which is,
I'll pull it out.
It's on the balcony of the mountain chalet, and the statue that's off to the far right is something that always was on Hunter's front deck, because we go over there on Sunday afternoons and play volleyball. But I can't remember where he got it from.
There's a backstory there, and it's kind of funny. It involves Joe here, who I'd like to speak next. He traded this sculpture to Hunter for a motorcycle. Is that right?
I wasn't the person that did that.
Okay, you weren't. Okay.
No.
Well, and this is still in Al Farm today,
Yeah.
the sculpture.
But it was a fixture at Hunter's. But anyway, that's up on the deck of the mountain chalet. And as far as I know, it was one of the early times when you and I can't remember what the reason for it was. 1967 or so, and my memory is.
Hunter called that statue Nixon's illegitimate son.
The statue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to open it up. If there's anyone who has a good question about, for these gentlemen, about the events, about anything. Is there anybody out there? No? Here you go.
Thanks. The video that he mentioned, I know that you put it up on YouTube, and I saw it the other day. It was by Thames in England.
It's on freakpower.com.
It's on freakpower.com, but I found it on just by going on a YouTube search. And one of the things you see in the documentary is the phalanx of attention that came to Aspen at that time. So I'd like to know what it was like to that deluge that happened of attention, worldwide attention for the election. What was that like being a photographer and then all these other photographers showing up and all these other documentarians showing up?
Let's direct that question towards David.
Yeah, I couldn't quite hear
Okay,
it.
so what he said was, there was a deluge of reporting that came to Aspen, the film crews, all these other photographers. What was it like being from here and seeing this media onslaught?
Well, that was part of the story. I mean, it added a lot to the content and depth of the story to see that there was the BBC and had a film crew here, and other people did as well. I mean, it was mainly the film crews that kind of made the buzz. And I believe Life magazine came for a while too, because I remember they rigged up some big strobe light in the top of Parlor B so they could come in and shoot when they wanted. But it was just all part of the scene. So it sort of added some gravity to the whole operation.
Absolutely. And one of the interesting things that I found during my research, I thought it was just a small town campaign. There wasn't, national exposure. But one of the cool things that we revealed during the research was that it actually was covered nationally and internationally. This article right here is one of my favorite ones. It's called "Hippies May Elect the Sheriff," and it was published in the Washington Post. And then this one here, "Freak Power Candidate may be the next sheriff in Placid, Aspen, Colorado." And this was the New York Times. So there was all this national media attention. And it was really rich material. I'm going to read the first paragraph of this article because I think it sums up a lot of what he was trying to do perfectly. It says, "He was a little shaky," Hunter Thompson admitted. He had just tripped all night on mescaline and now stood in Mill Street, ever-present beer can in his hand, sun hat covering his bald head, contemplating with a sense of disbelief the coming ordeal. "It was really horrible," he said, referring to the long night. "I thought I was going to have a little time to be crazy, but all I could think about was this fucking race." He paused, focusing on his sockless, sneakered feet. Then he said, "I'm afraid the humor's gone out of it already. There's no more humor." This was a Saturday. Registration had closed the day before, and it was becoming evident from the number of people, mostly long-haired hippie types, who had registered as unaffiliated, that Hunter Thompson could be elected sheriff. This sent a wave of nervousness through the Aspen establishment and a spasm of horror through Hunter Thompson. Christ, now I've got to get serious. So you can see how kind of the campaign went from a joke to being a sort of serious affair as the events snowballed. Got another question here?
I got a question for DJ. Front and center. Now this will bring in everybody. Would you speak to the visual importance of the quadumvirate of Hunter's writing, Tom Benton's posters, Ralph Steadman's artwork and the two photographers here, how those four elements came together to form what we know as Hunter's legacy.
Yeah.
You know, one of the real pleasures about documenting this election was the amount of talented people involved. And when I mean talent, that's an understatement. You know, Tom Benton was a genius for political graphics. These guys are genius photographers. The rich visual history that he's alluding to, which is present in this, you know, I think is actually one of the unique, beautiful things about that campaign, because, you know, there were all these interesting people working together to document it. And there's a saying that I think I made up that's not valid, but it's the idea of a scenius, and it's, you know, S-E-N-I-U-S. And what that is when you get a group of geniuses working together that bounce all their ideas off of each other and who want to make better work and want to do better and want to create ideas and work together and use these different abilities that they have, that collectively forms what I call a scenius. And you can look through time, back through history, you know, in the Florence in the 1400s, you know, you get all these artists working together. You know, Gertrude Stein in Paris, you know, and all these writers, and Picasso and all these people. You know, when you get a rich cultural environment with talented artists, they feed off of each other. And, you know, I've said about Benton's work that it's genius, and all these gentlemen's work was genius too, but that sort of colorful environment and the feeding off of each other, I think, produced this flowering of graphics, art, photos that is sort of unprecedented in political elections. And lately, you know, the Obama campaign, the first one, there was a lot of art that came out of that with Shepard Fairey and, you know, famous posters being made all over. And that's sort of like the rebirth of this, which is awesome to see, you know, activism and art being used to influence politics. And that's, you know, something that we've been talking about here. Hey, let's not talk about history and the campaign. Let's make posters now for today. You know, we should be out there taking photos. We should be out there making posters. We should be out there doing things and using their work as an inspiration to not be absent or pacifist or anything like that. So, hope that works. Got a few other questions here.
So what took place here in the early 70s was a genuine political transformation. And those kinds of transformations usually require the convergence of many different factors, some of which DJ just mentioned in terms onto the artistic and creative side. On the sort of the social political side, there were at least two factors going on. One was rapacious land use policies, or no policies that caused rapacious land use conditions, and the other one was really horrible treatment of unconventional young people here at the time, because the community at that time was still controlled by more traditional forces. And it might be worthwhile for Joe to sort of set the stage to say what was it actually like, what was actually happening as a practical matter to those young people in the community, and how did he get involved in the response to that?
Well, I had been licensed to practice law about 6 weeks to 2 months, something like that, when a couple of physicists who were honored at the 50th reunion of the Aspen Center for the Physics about a year ago walked into my office and asked me if I was familiar with what was going on in the municipal court. And I wasn't. So I went over there, and they thought that these kids were being abused. And what I saw the very first time I attended Guido Meyer's municipal court was what turned out to be a 15-year-old boy with long blonde hair, no shirt, blue jeans, no shoes, two burly policemen on each side, bringing him before Guido Meyer, who was the police judge. And they had arrested him for hitchhiking. He had come in over Independence Pass and was trying to get to San Francisco, hitchhiking out by the Forest Service. And the police said they saw him trying to hitchhike, and Guido Meyer went into a kind of a tirade about how you dirty, filthy hippies are really affecting our business, and we're going to teach you a lesson, and we're going to get you out of here. And the gavel came down, and boom, he was sentenced to 3 months in jail. And they had 7 people in the Pickens County Jail for 3 months each for doing nothing. They were all young hippies. And the kid, upon hearing that sentence, started crying, and it was like a movie. And the burly policemen, one on each arm, and they're dragging him. His feet are behind him like that. And they drag him out of the courtroom while he's crying. And I had just finished the year before a constitutional law seminar, and this kind of didn't jab with the way courts were supposed to be operated. So I got involved and filed the first, and I'd never been in court before. I've only been licensed a couple months. And I filed the first Civil Rights Act suit. It had recently been passed at the federal level in Colorado against the police, the mayor, the city council for the discrimination in the way they were enforcing the city ordinances. If you had long hair and hitchhiked, no problem. You went to jail. If you had short hair, no problem. So they were clearly arresting these kids and using vagrancy, hitchhiking, blocking the streets, because sometimes they would sit on the sidewalk and play their flutes. And the judge was appalled. I was terrified. I was on one side all by myself. There were 6 lawyers for the city on the other side, and the judge is higher than the ceiling on this giant bench in Denver with black marble going up 2 or 3 stories behind him. But he came to the conclusion and made the statement that what's been going on in Aspen is a disgrace, and it's a black mark on the judicial system. This has gone on as long as it had. And since the case had been filed, no further incidences had happened, and the police were advised by their lawyers not to do it anymore, and they were promising they were going to be good from there on. So he did not issue the injunction. We were asking for an injunction, and under the law, if there's an immediate irreparable harm about to happen, a court can issue an order that you stop. But if it's not an immediate irreparable harm, they can't issue an injunction. So he gave me his home phone number and said, if you hear of any more of these incidences, call me and I will immediately issue such injunction. But until there's evidence that they're going to continue this behavior, I'm not. So that was the resolution of that trial. I was forever at odds with the business community thereafter because they were the ones who had petitioned this to occur.
Well,
He was fired by what actually happened is the Pickens County Bar Association, when all this was brought to their attention, finally got off their duff and took the one and only political action that I'm aware that they ever took, which was to petition the city council to remove Guido. And they did.
And I'll say a little thing about Guido, just a little background. He owned a restaurant around the corner, and in this article that's in the book called How Aspen Feels About the Hippies, there's a reporter that went around and asked everybody in town, how do you feel about the hippies? Some people had really nice, answers, like this guy, James Oster. He said, Christ was an active man. Love is not passive. Other people says, I don't really know anything about them. I couldn't even tell you what part of the hip they move. Other people I'll just read.
Read
I'll
Bert
read.
Bidwell's.
What's that? Bert Bidwell's? Yeah.
Yeah, right
So
up in the
Bert
middle.
Bidwell said, "Hippies are an absolute disgrace to society. They need a stretch in the service. It would do them more good than anything, I think. It is affecting Aspen the way they're using and abusing the town. You can't clutter the town with a bunch of pigs and retain the same quality merchandise. What you need to do is get a public bath, scrub them, shave them, give them a haircut, and send them off to Vietnam." And I'll mention Guido's quote because it sort of illustrates the feelings in the town. Let's see. Let's find Guido.
Well, let me just say about Bert Bidwell, before you do that, he proceeded to put iron spikes on the top of the wall of the Bidwell building so these dirty hippies wouldn't be sitting on his nice clean wall.
Somebody. So the last thing I'll say about Guido, and there's a lot of Guido bashing. He was an interesting guy, but at the time he wasn't that great. He says, "They want to make Aspen the hippie center in Colorado. We have gotten too weak. We are not tough like we were in the old days when we took care of the cattle thieves. As long as you have businessmen supporting the hippies, they will remain." But he also says, "Hippies are supported by communists. They are working from within. It's the same as the third column in the 30s in Europe that gave rise to Hitler. Riots, hippies, beatniks, they all want the same, working from Moscow." So gives you an idea of the colorful and anti-hippie scene going on then. And
Joe, wasn't
well,
after that, how did it proceed that now that magistrates have to be a lawyer? Wasn't that in response to Guido's?
we're going to take another question from the crowd real quick. Is anyone else out there have another question? Come on. Come on. Bill? Bob?
I'd like to tell my story about Guido.
Yeah.
Thank you. In 1970, a kid I went to high school with came out to visit me. He had just graduated from medical school, and he had a job in a new specialty, emergency room medicine. And his job was in LA, so he hung out with me for a few days here. We both had hair down on our shoulders. My mother was calling me Cochise. She didn't like it. But we went into Guido's on a hot summer day, 1970. Guido was polishing glass. He had his back to us, and he said, "I will be right with you." He turned around and he saw our hair, and he said, "You fucking hippies, get out of here. You shit in the rivers. You piss in the woods. You filthy scum. Get out, get out." So we laughed and said, "Whoa, that was a mistake." 6 years later, I was a rookie deputy cruising by the airport, and dispatch calls and says, "We have a hit and run at the airport circle." I was 10 seconds away. I pulled in time to catch Guido flying out of the airport in his car, totally wasted. I pulled him over, put him through the roadside sobriety test, said, "Guido, you remember me?" He goes, "No, you long-haired pig." And I said, "I tried to get a beer from you in 1970. So I took him to the jail, and he refused to be bonded out. In his pocket, he had $5,000 in soggy $100 bills. He had urinated himself. His daughter came down, started yelling at him in German, and peeled off 3 wet hundreds, posted his bond, and took Guido home. Karma.
How are we doing on time? We good? Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Part of the Liberty Salon is getting people involved. So here we go. This is Bobby Mason, famous musician.
Yeah, that's why I'm so rich. I'm making hundreds of dollars a year still. Actually, I'm making less than when I came here in '69. That's the truth. But I still love what I do. Thank you very much. You too. Bobby and I were going to start a singing group, and then we just gave up the idea. But I've been here everybody up there is my great friends. I've been here since 1969. But I remember we're talking about the art and the photography that brought this in, that brought the soul into this town. In the 70s, I was playing in a group called Black Pearl. And it was really fun, I think. There's a lot of scars from that. We're actually doing, this is not a plug, but we're actually going to do a reunion next Saturday, which should be really interesting. The drummer asked me, what are we going to do? And I says, we're going to play for an hour, take 2 breaks during that hour, and then eat and talk to people. But
I want to interrupt real quick. This is the concert poster, one of the concert posters that's in the book, and it's Black Pearl, Fat City, 9 p.m., Hunter Thompson benefit at Danny's.
I wish I could have been there. That was in earlier days of my life. But, you know, I'm thinking about Hunter, and we were either Starwood or Buffett or the Eagles or whatever playing at the Double Diamond. And Hunter would sit back in the green room with us all the time, and he would go, I just always remember this. Hey, Robbie, I got to tell you this. I got things. Hunter, I don't have a clue what you're saying, you know. But it was a great. The music, what was going on in this town was amazing. The music, the people I got to play with, the people that were here, that were intelligent enough to go away. But you know, I never did leave. I never wanted to. Still don't. But the music and the politics and the art and the everything. I walked into this town in '69 and said, I'm home. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Bobby, benefit after benefit for all kinds of progressive candidates, including myself. And it made a lot of, in many cases, it made it possible for us to run because we didn't have any money. So people like Bobby and others, other musicians, Dan Garrett and others made it possible for us to run for office.
Yeah, and I'll also say something about the grassroots nature of the campaign. Like Mr. Kensley just mentioned, there were a lot of people that contributed to Hunter's campaign in a lot of different ways. Artistically, you know, there was a rumor that they were selling peyote to fund the campaign also, unsubstantiated. Is there any other questions out there? We get some? Okay, here you go.
One of the things that is obvious about Hunter S. Thompson, as mentioned in that Washington Post or the New York Times article, he was saying, now I have to get serious. Was it serious for him? You guys were there during this campaign. Was it a lark for Hunter, or how serious did he take the actual run?
Yeah, maybe we'll ask David to answer that.
My feeling was he was very serious about it, and there were a number of people that could have been doing other things, other places, who came to work on his campaign as well. I have one picture somewhere up there of sort of a backroom session. It's Hunter and Oscar, his lawyer, I think it was Ed Bastian, and this man Kennedy from Washington, D.C. They're all around this table with one light hanging down. It looks like a real backroom political scene. And that sort of, to me, set the tenor for the campaign. There was a lot of strategy talk going on, and they were taking it very seriously.
Yeah, and, I'm just going to mention real quick the people in this photo. This is obviously Hunter in the back. This is Ed Bastian, who's campaign manager. Oscar Acosta, who also ran for the sheriff of Los Angeles County in 1970 on the Brown Power platform. And then William Kennedy, who is an award-winning author. Really amazing, amazing guy. His books are depressing, though. The Albany trilogy is really good. Freddie Phelan's Last Game, if you get a chance. But all very serious people. You know, at the beginning it might have been a joke, but as things steamrolled, it was deadly determined. So, any questions out there? Anybody? Anybody? I'm kidding. Short and sweet.
Hi, Joe. I haven't seen you for a while. Yeah, and I remember, short and sweet. I got here in '86, and just the echoes, the ripples of all this where it was going on still. And I remember meeting Dwight Shulman, Joe Edwards, Hunter Thompson, and it's Bob, Sheriff Emeritus, all these people who were, what did you call it, seniors of this election. But even bigger was the change that was, just could have come, and this is a return to it. And I think that the feeling, the power, the strength, and the cause is still there. DJ, thank you from the heart.
Well, and I'm going to follow up with Francis's question before we give it to Joe, just because I'll say that in the book, the Freak Power book, we talk a lot about, the campaign didn't just end. Hunter didn't just lose. He laid the groundwork for a lot of changes that make Aspen the way it is today. And Joe here carried through on a lot of the ideas, primarily with the downzoning, and he was elected in 1972. So although he lost his election for mayor, he was reelected, and he profoundly changed the community. And one of the amazing things about this book is the idea that although Hunter lost, there were all these changes from law enforcement through Dick Keenest and Bob Broadus, but also limiting development, protecting the environment, all these really profound things. And I'm going to pass this over to Joe because he made a lot of those changes happen. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the legacy of that campaign.
Well, it wasn't planned. It sort of happened. And, let me read what Hunter wrote. He could express things in ways I wish I could. This was his statement about what our program was when I ran for mayor. And you'll notice it says, our program basically was to drive the real estate goons completely out of the valley, to prevent the highway department from bringing a 4-lane into town, and to ban all auto traffic from every downtown street, turn them into grassy malls for everybody could do whatever's right. The cops would become trash collectors and maintenance men for a fleet of municipal bicycles for anybody to use. No more large space-killing apartment buildings to block the views. No more land rapes, no more bus for flute playing or blocking the sidewalk. Fuck the tourists, dead end the highway, zone the greedheads out of existence, and in general create a town where people could live like human beings instead of slaves to some bogus sense of progress that is driving us all mad. Now, it was a crazy time. It was a real confrontational clash of cultures. And it was, the unsung heroes in all of this was a group of guys that started meeting at an architect's house, a guy named Robin Molney. And it was Bob Lewis and Jim Salter and, who else? There was Robin Molney, of course, Fritz Benedict, Michael Solheim, and they were opposed to what was happening here. In one summer, the Aspen Square in the north of Nell went up. And before that, you could walk around the downtown area and you could always see Little Nell. For lunch, you took a brown bag up on the hill and sat there and looked back down on the town. And that was a fundamental blockage of view that a lot of people really didn't think was progress. And these guys got together, and without any endorsement from any of the government, decided to try to create a community consensus. And they called it the Citizens for Community Action. And what they did is they put an ad in the paper that says, on such and such a Thursday night at so-and-so's house, Precinct 1 will have a meeting for anybody interested to come and discuss, and they had an agenda. The 4-lane highway, to put in zoning, should we build sewer plant down at beyond Aspen Village, which would encourage, of course, Bugsy wanted to do that, all subdivisions all the way down to Aspen Village. So they went through this catalog of community questions, and the precinct whatever would come to a consensus of what they thought ought to happen. And that happened in all the precincts in the town. And then they held a convention at Pepke Auditorium and developed the Citizens for Community Action Plan. And this was done entirely by individuals, no endorsement by the chamber, no endorsement by the council, no endorsement by the county commissioners. These were just citizens trying to figure out on their own what their consensus was and what they wanted to have happen in this community. And that was the source, really, of all of the subsequent upheaval in the land use program that was carried out during the next decade. And those guys really, in my book, are the genesis of all of this. And Hunter's program, both when he ran for sheriff and when he helped me when I ran for mayor, in fact, he and Peggy Clifford pretty much wrote these ads. I was a total novice. I didn't know what I was doing. When will Aspen become the place you left? That was Peggy Clifford's idea, and pictures of freeways and stuff. And here's a subdivision. You know, there's still time. Vote for me. So that was really unique. I've never heard of any other community that did that. And as a result, I got dragged into politics. I'd never thought about politics ever. And then
he's downplaying his role in all this. Yeah. Really, he was elected in 1972 and helped institute the trail system we have, the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority we have, the affordable housing programs we have, the downsizing of the zoning in the whole valley. A lot of the reasons we live here and the place that it is are because of what Joe did as a county commissioner, as well as Dwight Shellman and Michael Kinsley and a lot of other people who followed through on a lot of Hunter's ideas and followed through on the CCA platforms. You know, it didn't just die with Hunter losing the election. In fact, a lot of the things he brought up are so prescient. You know, we talk oftentimes you could just change the date on these, you know, quotes, many Aspen residents move here to escape the turmoil and trauma of big city living, to get away from poisoned air, foul rivers, traffic jams, congestion, noise, and frenzy. You know, these things are still applicable today. I just want to thank Joe for helping make it that
it is. Well, it's still going on. You know, one of the things Hunter wrote was to stop car traffic. And I noticed Andy Stone just put a letter or a column in the paper just last week about the traffic jam and suggesting that there be an intercept lot and a shuttle into town. And we proposed that back in 1973, 4.
When Hunter was saying, mall the whole downtown, dig up all the streets, with jackhammers, plant grass. He said, Grand Junction has a mall. It's not that radical of an idea. I got on the Facebook page for the city when I said, hey, what should we do with downtown? And I said, mall it all. Because that's what Hunter said. And Fritz Benedict, he mentioned, a famous architect who built a lot of houses, and he used to own all of Red Mountain. he said he developed this little drawing of a downtown delivery system where trucks would use the alleyways, no pedestrians. And, you know, in modern cities, that's becoming the thing. And, you know, cars, traffic problems, that's one thing that Hunter talks about. But there were a lot of things he talked about during that campaign that were prescient, and now we're just dealing with it now. You know, legalization of marijuana, cops killing unarmed people. You know, he was talking about that then. So I think a lot of these things, like I mentioned, you just change the date. So I'm going to open it up again. Anybody have any? Here you go. Hold on just a second. Hold on a second.
What was the final vote count of the election?
So the final vote count, I'll read it over here. It's Hunter Thompson got 1,065 votes. Carol Whitmire got 1,533. And Glenn Ricks got 171. So Hunter lost by about 450 votes. They had registered 739 people to vote.
The most important thing when you look at that chart is look at the flow of them by precincts.
Yeah,
Hunter
exactly.
won in town, and as you started to go down valley, the vote count dropped till about 2 or 3 per precinct.
Exactly, and Bob said it exactly right. If you look at that, you can see the voting by precinct, and Hunter did win the city. All the people in town, you know, he won here, but he was such a threat to ranchers, conservatives down valley, people that were scared shitless of him. They all voted against him, but in town here, he won. It was a great question. Thank you. Any other questions out there? I don't have one. Any other ones? Come on, we got one back there. I know we got one somewhere around here. All right, I'll ask a question. This is to David. You've shot photos all over the world, climbed the Himalayas, traveled everywhere for National Geographic. Can you talk just briefly, maybe just about engaging with Hunter, or about photographing him?
Well, it wasn't difficult. He was used to having media around, and like I was saying earlier, it's a very serious thing for them. So they were completely open to photographs, and he was an uninhibited guy. He had nothing to hide. The only person that was just kind of a little bit reluctant about it was Ed Bastian, who many of you know. He's comes back now, and he often does sort of spiritual, theological themed conferences here, and he was that kind of guy. But I've got pictures of him holding a shotgun, guarding Hunter. So I always threatened if he ever ran for public office, I was going to bring that picture out.
And a lot of the photos that David took are just unbelievable. He followed them in on election day when, the tension was super high, and you see them in the van, and there's the guns and the drugs and the booze, and there's Eddie.com holding the gun, and then in the tiny reflection you see David up in the corner taking this unbelievable shot. Any questions? Any more questions? Are we okay? Here we go.
This is going to be a slightly hard to verbalize question. This is a small community, partly geographically. It's forced to be a small community, and there's no college here, but there's a high level of intelligentsia, at least it's formed that. There's a ski community. I'm just curious, to you in particular, having served in office, how do you think you could translate what's happened here to other communities that don't have this geographic definition? Is that too out there?
That's great. That's wonderful. I mean, you can talk about, whatever you want.
Well,
I think also Joe has a lot of feelings about what's happened to Aspen over the years.
It's really about Aspen.
Exactly.
Take what's happened, transfer it over to some other communities.
I think other communities could gain from doing what the Citizens for Community Action did. They could take that and arrive at a consensus. that would then become apparent to everybody, including the elected officials. The elected officials sit up there and, you know, they get proposals by developers to do this or to do that, or they have to make this decision or that decision, and they don't have any input from the community. So I think, in fact, one of the platforms of the Citizens for Community Action was to make that kind of an entity a permanent source of input to the governmental entities. And when I was a county commissioner, we created community caucuses in Snowmass Creek and Red Mountain, et cetera, and they were supposed to meet and give us input, but it kind of didn't really, it wasn't strong enough. So I think that an important lesson could be learned would be to create some kind of a continual feedback mechanism of different areas of a community to constantly be reevaluating what are our goals, what do we want to become, what needs fixing, that can then function as an information pipeline to, you know, to the elected officials, because they're mostly, you know, in our case, Dwight and I were both lawyers, so, and there was only 2 out of 3. We had 3 people on the commission, so we sort of ran the show for 8 years, kind of doing what the Citizens for Community Action platform said. We pretty much, that's what we were doing. But I wish we had gone further. I wish we had somehow institutionalized that feedback mechanism. And in our case, a developer would come in. I mean, when I took office, the zoning between Aspen and Snowmass was 55 units an acre, by right. Walk in, get your building permit. A population theoretically of almost 500,000 people. We rezoned it first to 1 unit per 10 acres in 1974, and you should have seen that public hearing. They were spilling out of the courthouse. They had to evacuate some of the people because the roof rafters were bending, and you know, threats on our lives, etc. But Dwight and I, you know, developer said, "I'm going to sue you." We'd say, "Great, that's at least 5-year moratorium right there." Most small town officials cringe at the thought, "Oh God, they're going to sue us. We better give them permission to."
Like with the building next door, they pretty cringed.
This building too.
Oh, it's good to go back close to home.
Although Andy Hecht, who owns it, and who Dwight Shellman and I hired and brought to town, has been very generous in allowing this to happen. But
and I will say, you know, in the end of the book, we do talk about this legacy, and you know, obviously we all live in this unbelievable special place, and Joe's actions and Michael Kinsley's here and Dwight Shellman, they all made the town the special place that it is. And you know, there were some unintended consequences of those zoning laws. You know, limiting the supply made demand go crazy, and you know, there are a lot of what's that? That is arguable. It is arguable, yeah. But you know, we have to thank him and other elected officials for following through a lot of what Hunter wanted. We have any more questions? Okay. Here we go. Okay.
Thanks. I wanted to acknowledge Joe and Michael and Dwight Shellman for creating the affordable housing program, because you know, without the 3,000 or so affordable housing units, this community would be a very different community. And I'd be interested to
We'll let him talk.
I'd be interested to ask Michael about your comment that the unintended consequences of downzoning, created major inflation, and you said that's arguable. I'd like to talk to you about
We'll
that.
give you the mic. You want to pass this over?
Well, the two very comparable economies are Eagle County and Pitkin County. And for the last 35 years or so, in those comparable economies, you've had severe constraints on supply in Pitkin and no constraints on supply in Eagle, and affordability is an equal problem in both places, which says that the cause of the highly inflationary housing market is not constraints on supply, but rather the nature of the demand. It's inelastic demand with this. And with regard to the affordable housing, clearly it was a crucially important thing, and we're happy we did it. And where we fell down was not doing the similar thing with commercial space.
Bob, you have any questions? There was a few other hands over here. We'll let you ask one more question just because your last one was so good.
I didn't realize there was so much control here. This is a bit of a rebuttal to Joe. Didn't the citizens of Aspen just pass a referendum that effectively held the council's feet to the fire, saying we have ordinances, do not violate those? So we have made some significant progress in this whole development thing. It's a difficult battle, but we have made progress.
By a majority of pro-development people, and they're the ones that allowed these 4 stories and penthouses and the infill and the art museum. And I think that in my view, I think it was a big mistake, and I hope that it stops. And what happened is there was an initiative ordinance that was adopted by the people that ran counter to what the city council was doing. The city council, dominated by the pro-development people now in office, was granting variances and exemptions and allowing things to go beyond what the basic zoning plan was. And so the people that were upset with that prepared an initiative ordinance prohibiting them granting these variances and exemptions, and to require the council to march to the drummer that was dictated by the basic zoning code. So it's a little bit of an uprising against, the pendulum swings back and forth. I mean, after I left office, they've changed the code to allow these gigantic houses. I would never have allowed that. I totally disagree. I think it's a horrible mistake to have these 15, 20,000 square foot houses around. But, I couldn't stay there forever. And so anyway, there is a lot of people that still agree with let's control it. And hopefully that'll prevail.
I'm just going to say a few brief words about how important it was for me to work with these gentlemen on the book. And each one of you guys brought something so special to the book. I went up to meet with Joe about a year ago, or actually not even, I think it was 9 months ago. Sort of talked about the book and it talked about the ideas, and I really didn't have the story right. He was sort of the birth of all of this, representing the hippies and the hippies being oppressed. And I was sort of focusing just on Hunter's campaign. And he says, you got to get the hippie story. You got to get the persecution. You got to talk about the beginning, the roots of all of Hunter's campaign, and that was really invaluable. It sent me back to work on the book for 6 more months and looking into the past and the roots of the discord that caused Hunter to run. And David, you know, it was an unbelievable synchronistic thing for him to open up his archives to me and to deliver this unbelievable set of contact sheets that he said, you know, a couple of these have been published. This one was on the cover of the Rolling Stone. This was in the New York Times, you know. But it was like the first time that I had ever seen that much stuff from the campaign. And working with him helped add a whole element that Bob Krieger had already set up. And Bob and I had worked previously on the Benton book. And Tom and Bob were really good friends and had shared their love of motorcycles. And Tom helped build Bob's house. And he had generously donated photos to the Tom Benton book. And that's how we met. And I miss your place up in Snowmass. I miss going up and seeing him and seeing the planes fly by. He had this beautiful old little place, and we'd go look at the photos and talk about this history. And so I just wanted to say just briefly, it's been a real pleasure that all you guys contributed to something that I was putting together, and it means a lot that you're here and sharing these stories. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say one other thing, actually 2 other things. One thing is that in the middle of Hunter's campaign, the city police towed a car and found a sawed-off shotgun. They then arrested the owner of that car. It was an illegal shotgun, shorter than 18 inches. They then arrested the guy and then got a call from Sheriff Whitmire saying, that guy's working for me. Sheriff Whitmire had hired this guy from Denver who had been working for the DEA undercover to come infiltrate Hunter's campaign headquarters and try to get Hunter to admit doing something illegal or to try to entice Hunter to get buy a shotgun or a machine gun off of him or buy some drugs from him in order to have the sheriff then be able to arrest Hunter. That's the level of nuttiness and craziness to which that campaign had arisen.
And this is the gentleman he was talking about, James
guy.
Bromley. And Hunter and his people grew suspicious of him because he came into the Jerome bar and pulled out a switchblade and started stirring his whiskey drink. Where's Hunter Thompson? And later on when they were saying, this guy from the newspaper, he's giving us a really hard time. He's just overhearing stuff. And the guy goes, well, I'll go over. I'll go kill him. There will be blood up to their ankles in the streets. So Hunter and the guys got really suspicious. And Hunter sent a guy to photograph him and all the way to Inglewood to his house. So they photographed him at his house, and then the guy, he didn't like the photo that Hunter had published in the paper saying, hey, keep an eye out for this guy, he's a rat. And he sent this photo to Hunter, and in it says, Hunter had sent a guy to photograph him previously, and the photo wasn't that great. But he sent this photo to Hunter, and he said, Dear Mr. Thompson, if you wanted a picture, why didn't you just ask? There was no need for your third-rate James Bond tactics. Tell your funny little photographer that even my wife had him spotted for what he was. See you soon, Jim. And that sort of absurdity and craziness about the campaign really fueled the desire to write this book and to put this whole thing together. And the absurdity, the seriousness, all of the elements that came to create this campaign were really unbelievable, and that's what we tried to capture in the new book. And you can find the book at freakpower.com, and also we have signed copies here available. And I believe that's going to be it. I want to thank these guys again, and thank you all for coming.